本日はご来場いただきまして誠に
Thank you so much for joining our symposium today. From now, we would like to start the World Heritage Inscription Council for the Early Modern Japanese Educational Sites will now be holding the International Symposium, the Educational Heritage of Early Modern Japan Seen from Overseas. My name is Norihisa Sekiguchi. I am from the World Heritage Inscription Council for the Early Modern Japanese Educational Sites. I will be the moderator for today. First, I would like to introduce the organizers of today's symposium. Chair of the World Heritage Inscription Council for Early Modern Japanese Educational Sites, Mayor of Mito, Yasushi Takahashi. Next, Vice Chair, Naohide Hayakawa, Mayor of Ashikaga. Next, Vice Chair, Takeshi Yoshimura, Mayor of Bizen City. Hi, my name is Naohide Hayakawa. I am a mayor of Bizen City, and I'm looking forward to see you tonight at the get-together. Next, the mayor of Hita, Mukuno Michiko, Vice Chair. So, we would like to hear greeting word from Yasushi Takahashi, Chair of the Council. Chair Takahashi, please take the stage. Hello, everyone. I am Yasushi Takahashi, Chairman of the Council and Mayor of Mito. Thank you very much for your participation in today's International Symposium. And today we'll have speeches from our vice chairs of our mayors. It's going to be 4 of us, and 4 of us are participating today. I'm going to extend my greetings as a chair of the council. So today's International Symposium is called The Educational Heritage of Early Modern Japan Seen from Overseas. And thank you very much for coming today and for joining us in the venue and online. I'm very happy to see you all today here. Mito City of Ibaraki Prefecture, Ashikaga City of Tochigi Prefecture, Bizen City of Okayama Prefecture was efforts by 4 cities, including Hita City of Oita Prefecture, to have the educational heritage of early modern Japan recognized as a World Heritage Site began in September 2008, when the Agency for Cultural Affairs announced that the early modern educational heritage is an asset in a field that has not yet been established in Japan. That starting point would be the site be designated as a cultural heritage site candidate for the World Heritage Tentative List Category 1B, which should be considered to prove its value as a World Heritage Site. In response to this recommendation, World Heritage Inscription Council for the Early Modern Japanese Educational Sites was established in November 2012 to carry out research with the participation of expert committee members, and the 4 cities collaborated to carry out public awareness activities. Next, we have been doing a lot of surveys and different types of research, and in our 4 cities, been conducting that research to raise awareness about this event. And we will be holding different symposiums in different cities, so we've been very busy. And in November 2020, as a result of our research, we published the Educational Heritage of Early Modern Japan, proposal for candidate assets to be inscribed on the World Heritage Tentative List. So we published it, and then in the same year, we also published an English translation of a proposal summary. In addition to submitting these proposals to the Agency for Cultural Affairs, our 4 cities have made steady progress, including requesting that our sites be added to the World Heritage Tentative List. So it basically was a big teamwork done, and our 4 cities have been collaborating on that. And under these circumstances, the Agency for Cultural Affairs has pointed out that based on the activities of this council, we need to present our research results to international experts and seek a wider range of opinions. So that was a recommendation of Agency for Cultural Affairs. So the 4 cities of ours believe that the opinions we receive from domestic and international experts are very important and will help us review the issues we need to address in the future. So that's why today we have decided to hold an international symposium, seeing this as an opportunity to gain greater understanding of the situation. And we invited many participants today to this symposium to gather as many opinions as possible. So today we invited we have Japanese professors who are expert members of our council, and there are 4 of them, and they're going to hold a panel discussion together. And also we invited Professor Margaret Mell and Mr. Jean Bombard as our 2 experts from abroad who have experience in cultural heritage sites, and they would give us today keynote speeches. So educational sites are very important as a world heritage, and we believe in that very strongly. That's why we started our symposium today. And we hope that those attending this international symposium, all of you, or those who are viewing us online, will gain a deeper understanding of the educational heritage of early modern Japan. So I also hope that you will become our big supporters and cheerleaders for our achievements. So thank you very much for your time today, and let's start our symposium. So we have very limited time today, but we hope that we have a great symposium today and that you all enjoyed today, and I'm really hoping that it will go smoothly today. Thank you very much. Let's start.
Next, for today's International Symposium, Director of Agency for Cultural Affairs, Cultural Resources Utilization, Cultural Heritage International Cooperation with Ogawa, Kobe, has sent a message. Today, a cultural property investigator, Suzuki Chihei, is here, so I would like to ask him to deliver the message. Mr. Suzuki, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Today, because Ogawa has something else to do, can't come here today, so I'd like to address the message today. Today, I'd like to express my gratitude to experts in various fields, the many people who participated in this symposium. Thank you for participating. About early modern Japan Education Heritage Group in 2006 and 2007, when Cultural Affairs Agency asked the public to propose assets for registration. Proposals for Mito City, Ashikaga City, and Bizen City became the initial basis. Then two additional assets from Hita City later now initiative are underway. In 2015, since Bizen City joined the Council, the four cities have been involved in researches. After many international symposiums so far, they are working to verify and disseminate the international value of receiving diverse education. In this symposium, we invited Bubang Sensei from Canada, Margaret Thomas Sensei from Denmark to carry out further investigation. Experts, there's no need for sweet whispers this time. Please take this opportunity to not only talk about the good points, but also discuss what needs to be revised and organized. I strongly hope that the early modern Japan's educational heritage group will take a step forward. At last, I would like to express my deepest respect to everyone involved in organizing this symposium, and I sincerely hope that today's discussion will be fruitful. Education for Cultural Affairs, Cultural Assets Utilization Division, Cultural Heritage International Cooperation Office Director Okawa. Thank you so much.
鈴木様、ありがとう。
Suzuki-san, thank you very much. So we would like to start our symposium also and continue with it with Yasushi Sensei. Professor Mel, please prepare for your keynote speech. So let me now briefly explain about the purpose of this symposium. So first I would like to explain about the World Heritage Inscription Council for the early modern Japanese educational sites. The council was formed in 2012 to advance efforts aimed at getting the educational heritage of early modern Japan registered as a World Heritage Site. The four cities that make up the council are Mito City in Ibaraki Prefecture, Ashikaga City in Tochigi Prefecture, Bizen City in Okayama Prefecture, and Hita City in Oita Prefecture. Next, I would like to explain about the nominated cultural properties. The four cities where the council operates are home to nationally designated cultural properties, which each demonstrates the diversity of educational practices in Japan during the early modern era. So those are Ashikaga Gakko in Ashikaga, which is the oldest academy in Japan. Shizutani School in Bizen is the oldest extant public school for commoners. Hita City is home to Kangien, Japan's largest private academy in early modern Japan, and Mameda Town, which can be called its college town. Mito City is home to Kodokan, Japan's largest domain school, and Kairakuen, a garden for relaxation. And also other key locations representing Japanese educational heritage. So today we're going to represent those 6 sites as very important locations in Japanese educational heritage of the early modern era. The Council is promoting the inscription of the above 6 properties as World Heritage Sites while looking at those properties from the angle of education for all classes, an invaluable resource in the pre-modern world. So next, I would like to explain about the purpose and content of today's symposium. The Council considers these 6 nominated properties to be part of the educational heritage of early modern Japan and to prove their outstanding universal value, or OUV, which is a requirement for World Heritage inscription. And specialized committee was established within the Council. We have been conducting survey and research from multiple perspectives, such as history and World Heritage studies. As part of such survey and research, today's symposium will explore the evaluation of educational heritage sites from an international perspective and the issues facing their inscription. The speakers we invited from abroad are Professor Margaret Mell, who is deeply knowledgeable about the history of Japanese education, and Mr. Dino Bombaru, who possesses great knowledge about World Heritage Studies, like he is a part of ICOMOS, International Council for Monuments and Sites. So the two will give keynote speeches from their respective fields of expertise on educational heritage from an international perspective. Also, the members of a specialized section of the Council will join the panel discussion today. Professor Akihiko Hashimoto will serve as the coordinator. And in addition to Professor Mel and Mr. Bombaru, Professor Tsuguto Ezura, who is also very knowledgeable in his field, and Manabe Oishi and Professor Yasuoshi Okada, they will also take the stage. We will discuss various themes surrounding World Heritage Inscription from an overseas perspective. Although the term educational heritage may be a little unfamiliar to our symposium attendees, we hope that you will gain a deeper understanding of the cultural properties that represent the special characteristics of Japanese history.
Now let's move on to the keynote speech. The first speaker will be Margaret Mayo Sensei. Mayo Sensei is originally from Germany. She majored in Japanese studies at Bonn University from 1987 to 1988, was at Tokyo University. After that, she served at Cambridge University as a visiting researcher at the Scotland Indian School University as an assistant professor, at Scotland Stirling University as assistant professor, and is currently a professor at Copenhagen University in Denmark. She has been researching since early Japan period to periods about modern Japan educational history and cultural history. She has published a book in Japan entitled History and National Identity and Capacity in Japan. This time, she will be giving a lecture titled Early Modern Japanese Educational Heritage Seen from Overseas. Please. Everyone, hello. My name is Mayo, as introduced. Let me get started.
When I
was first asked to
When I was first asked to give this lecture, I was unsure about what to talk about. Eventually, I decided to start by telling you a little bit about my summer holidays in Scotland this year. So Scotland, more precisely Edinburgh, was my home for most of the time when I was working on my book about Kangaku-juku in Meiji, Japan, and I still love the city. So this year, one day, it was actually in July, I was taking the double-decker bus from the center of Edinburgh to South Queensferry. Next to me on the top deck sat a family, probably like a foreign tourists. Like, they looked like me, so probably they were also foreigners.
And a mother asked me, "What is this? Another castle?" Pointing out of the window of our right. I looked too late, but I had seen the building before, and I answered that I think some kind of school or college, because I have seen that before. Almost at the same moment, the bus passed another castle-like building on our left. By the gate, there was a huge notice saying, Stewart Melville College. Yes, this is a school. That night, I Googled, and the lady who asked me about was a school, and it was built in 1870s. It was a school by charitable foundation from bequest of merchants for poor students and orphans. The name is Faith College. Moreover, a reviewer for the Google claimed that the school was inspiration for Hogwarts. In J.K. Rowling Harry Potter's book, a few years ago, in 1950, I went to a Harry Potter tour in Edinburgh. I started my visiting Greyfriars Cemetery. Is famous for Greyfriars body. The cemetery has several graves with names that appeared in Harry Potter books. As the tour guided us, and the tour guided pointed at an impressive building nearby and said that the school was something that given JKR the idea for Hogwarts. The same summer, I was staying in a BB at West Central Edinburgh, and opposite the BB was another impressive building. It's Donaldson's School, and it was opened in 1850s. And all the buildings were designed and named and often well-known architectures. So in fact, I think there are several inspections for JKR's work. Moreover, JKR was not the first author to write about the school in the castle. For example, Annie de Blanton's Mallory, published in the 1950s and 1940s, is about a boarding school, and more recently in Japan, there's a book named Kagami no Kojo, Lonely Castle in the Mirror. It's not an official school, but it is a school for children. But why am I talking about this? To be honest, by the time I had finished drafting this lecture, I was not sure about it. But I realized that there's some words in English. It is castle in the air, and German in Russia. Even in France, there's the similar language, and the meaning will be it's a visionary and attainable scheme for daydream. That means that schooling and schools are often the objects of dreams. As children, we might dream of going to school like Hogwarts. As adults, especially if we are educated, we might dream of the ideal school or education system. And this is not why we need heritage sites related to education, because education is not just about here and now, but also about the future. It's not only about the possible, but also about It seems impossible today, but will become possible tomorrow. One of my themes in this paper of education is a source of inspiration. However, I will say a little bit about my research. That is what motivated me to start doing research on Kangaku-juku. Before researching Kangaku-juku, I published my PhD thesis about historiography. At that time, I wanted to research about history in Japan, especially about European or German influence on modern academic discipline of history in Japan. But at my research progress, I realized that most of the historians whose work I studied had a long education background in Kangaku. Indeed, the pioneer of the first generation, including Shigeno Yasuko and Kumeko Nitake, grew up in the Tokugawa period, were largely trained in Kangaku. And the same true of several important features of younger generation, including, for example, Suematsu Kensho, and Juku he intended was Saisen and Yokohashi in North Kyushu. And I went there about 20 years ago, and I researched that. And that became one of my case studies. Now it is also proposed as very famous, just like the Kangien. It's something about 20 years ago. I have finished that theme. Now I'm doing something else. Now I'm researching about the music history. But I also researched the Meiji Jidai period about the. So I can see that there are some famous figures that I have researched in Meiji period. And I also indeed Shinoge Yasuki himself put a application to open a new school in the contemporary. Mishima Chusho also founded a juku named Nishio Gakusan. And I also know that some of the new jukus and also Kangaku juku has been established at that time. In fact, Shigeno himself also wanted to establish juku at that time.
So from now on, I would like to talk about Kangaku Juku and the myth of Juku. So when I was researching Juku, I was also reading up a little bit about this educational sites, but the main reason why I got interested in that is two things. First is that one was the importance of a Kangaku education for the political, intellectual, and cultural history of modern Japan. And one more thing was what I called Juku myth. That is the way the Juku and Terakoya, which was essentially a type of Juku, became an object of nostalgia, an instrument of protest used as a basis for criticizing the modern education system, or an inspiration for educational reformers. So this Juku myth stresses the strong personal influence on the teacher and the deep ties between teacher and the students, the community of students, and also so-called the emphasis on moral as well as intellectual training. So that myth basically stresses out all those things. So prevalent is this myth that it is very difficult for the historian to avoid seeing the Juku through the lens of the myth. In the end, I therefore decided to make the lens part of my study, rather than try to avoid it. I attempted to explain how it originated and give examples or how it operates. So thus I treat the Juku myth not just as a hindrance in my quest for historical truth, but also as a creative historical force in its own right. So talking about inspiration point of view of Juku, one of the best examples of the Juku myth is an inspiration for reformers of Obara Kuniyoshi and Tamagawa Gakuen. Obara was deeply influenced by Western writings on education during the Taisho era. He was one of the foremost representatives of the new education movement in Japan in the 1920s. So in 1929, the Tamagawa Gakuen was established. And also in 1950s, the fundamental principles of education at Tamagawa Gakuen were summarized by saying Juku education. So basically, Juku education was one of the principles of Tamagawa Gakuen. By Obara's time, the Juku had largely disappeared, which is very interesting. So Obara himself had no direct experience of the Juku, although as a child he heard stories that his grandfather talked about. So Obara's invocation on the Juku was thus part of more of a general trend in Japanese educational discourse. Remarkably, writers extolling the virtues of the Juku at around the same time as Obara often mentioned them together with European boarding schools. And in 1930s, even so they basically were comparing them to European boarding schools. So they perceived Juku as both universal and as essentially Japanese things. So this is certainly true of Obara Kuniyoshi's view on Juku education. For example, in 1924, in the February, in the earliest version of his work, Zenjin Kyoiku education, Obara does not refer to Juku or Terakoya. So in this early work, he mentions them in My Ideal School. In the chapter The School of My Dreams, he refers to his grandfather and asserts his own school would be a Terakoya or Juku, and not a public official type school. So he advocates a return to the Terakoya. For the Terakoya is being viewed as truly, like, let me read you his citation. Terakoya is truly something unique that Japanese education can boast of in relation to the world history of education. It may well be said that Juku education is basically a proud contribution of the Japanese to education system in general. No, so you can even so Abara-san was thinking that way. The statement he would repeat many times in similar words. The public education system, on the other hand, was based on Western models as the most modern institutions of Japan, and they were very universal. According to Obara, it was similar to Pestalozzi's school and also based on Obara's own ideas of education, which combined educational thought and practice from a variety of sources. A good example is the following sentence from his chapter on character education, where he talks about the education in Russia. I think with yearning fondness of Tolstoy's education, I certainly want to visit Tagore's school. I long for this nostalgic, natsukashi, the Terakoya. I desire the Juku. Although his concept of education through education by work, in Japanese called Rosako Kyoiko, was much influenced by European sources, he actually also quite liked the quote by Hirose Tanso, who said, and I cite, "Carry the water, and I shall hew wood." So Hirose Tanso's Kangien, one of the sites that forms part of a proposal by the Educational Heritage and World Heritage Registration Promotion Council, is actually commemorated on the campus of walking around of the Tamagawa Gakuen. So if you see on the slide, it was basically a model of his juku built by the volunteer students. I won't go any further into Obara's thought or into education on Tamagawa Gakuen, but I would like to emphasize Obara's assertion that the Terakoya is, and I quote, truly something unique. It is truly something unique that Japanese education can boast of in relation to the world history of education. And Obara uses Juku and Terakoya, by the way, interchangeably. So it may well be said that Juku education is a proud contribution of Japanese to education system, and Obara certainly has a point. And I assume that his view is also the view that inspired the Educational Heritage and World Heritage Inscription Promotion Council. But Obara's example also illustrates another point. And it's quite an important point, in my opinion. So again, I'll go back to my memories, but in 2002, when I walked across the campus to visit the school's library and archives to learn more about Tamagawa Gakuen, I was able to visit the campus itself, and I was able to observe visual evidence not only of Obara himself, but of his respect and even in reverence for Japanese educational heritage, but also of Obara's eclectic approach to education. So there is an observation by Obara and it concerned to classic music. And I love classic music myself, so I was like, oh, Beethoven, there's a mention Beethoven. And Obara says, like, as I see it, Beethoven here stands for values that are perceived as universal, being like one of the great composers of classic music. Incidentally, one of the earliest performances in Japan of Beethoven's famous Ninth Symphony, which was also actually the first Japanese year-end performance in in 1938. So it included a choir from Tamagawa Gakuen, but Beethoven was revered in Japan long before his symphonies could be heard. So I've already mentioned what I mean when I speak of myth and wish to stress it again. I'm using the word here, the myth, not as an opposition to truth whatsoever, but in the meaning of a positive creative process in which the phenomena are given a certain meaning that they do not inherently possess. So it's by no means is a negative usage of the word myth. And this process is also what happens when things are inscribed on the UNESCO's World Heritage List. Both the United Nations and the concept of World Heritage are basically imaginative constructs. I would also argue that these constructs are built both from a combination of two seemingly opposing ideas. And those ideas are one of those ideas is an idea of uniqueness. And another is the idea of commonalities. So or universality, just like Obara's educational thought. So uniqueness and universality. Or to put it differently, each nation has unique characteristics, but nations also have things in common. And that is goes by, as it said. Nationalism and globalization have sometimes been treated as opposing forces, but in reality, they are actually two sides of the same coin. Nations exist in relation to each other, and in order to actively relate to each other, they need a common language, or several common languages, both literally and metaphorically. This became especially clear to me in my research on music, and I'd like to talk about it a bit more. So, one thing that became clear to me in my research of music is that European countries and the Americas had a shared musical language. So they are like so-called national musics. And they sound similar even while composers try to express national distinctiveness. So if you listen to that, the melodies are quite similar. I'm talking about the 19th century here. And here, Meiji Japan faced a serious challenge, which people like Isawa Shuji, whom I introduced earlier, he was well too aware of it. Japanese music was too different from European music to harmonize well, permit the musical metaphor, with European music. In the theoretical realm of even if you create a Japanese hymn and try to make it sound like Japanese, like European music, so there might be some success, but in theoretical realm of musical scholarship, there is music is one entity and not a collection of different music. So it has it's supposed to have. It's not just during Meiji era, but also a few years after that. So Meiji national music was actually experiencing quite a snobbish attitude from elite reformers of Meiji. And in musical performance, on the other hand, the synthesis of a particular and universal, or rather supposedly universal, only happened several decades later, and was represented by the type of music the snobbish elite performers of Meiji despised, like popular music, kayo, kyoku, enka, and J-pop, genres that are often described as musical hybrids. So the need for a common language, or more broadly, a common currency, includes shared values. It follows from this that in order to be acknowledged as world heritage, uniqueness and local specificity are not enough. The proposed item also needs to possess some kind of common currency or universal appeal. And the descriptions on the website refer to outstanding universal value, or we will refer to it as OUV from now on. So that is a very specific phrase which is stated on the description of a UNESCO website. So education, and to some extent schools, are a global phenomenon, according to Ross. In 19th century, since the rise of national school systems, schools across the globe have become more similar to each other. And they started getting more like similar points. In what we call the pre-modern or early modern periods, this was actually not the case. Even within a single country, like in fact, many of today's nations like did not even exist. So here, to be honest, I wanted to talk a little bit about Europe as a European, but since we have a very limited time, I'm gonna skip it. And just a little bit, I would like to talk about like things that happened from 1500s. So I'll just skip a lot of things and just go to the conclusion of my keynote speech today. So in the list of UNESCO list, I tried to look at it, and mostly I only found sites in Europe and in East Asia. But the only site I found that might be regarded as comparable to the proposed Japanese sites is the Korean Sowon. So Korean Neo-Confucian Academies. What is Neo-Confucianism? So is it like a science on Somin? So, like if we go on a UNESCO website, and there is this like very general description, and it says the property, like if you can see on a screen, the description says the property is located in central and southern parts of the Republic of Korea and comprises 9 Sowon, representing a type of Neo-Confucian academy for Joseon dynasty, 15th to 19th centuries. And I think the most important is the last part. And if we think about it from the lens of Japanese educational sites, the way Chinese educational traditions were adapted in Japan, and like this last part of this slide also talks on that. So, in analogy, we might say that the proposed Japanese sites illustrate a historical process in which Neo-Confucianism from China was adapted to Japanese conditions. There are certainly similarities with proposed Japanese sites. Perhaps it's very getting clear, in my opinion. So if you compare Japanese educational sites and Korean educational site, so both of them have this outstanding, like if you think from the outstanding value side, the Japanese educational site is has similarities with that, especially in Ashikaga Gakko, and at the same time, like there are like similar points, and at the same time there are differences, starting with the use of the name shoin. So more significantly, the Japanese sites represent not just like one type of school, but several. Like, and similarly, in early modern Korea too, there were several types of schools, although none are included in the registered heritage sites. So, so in in so I think like instead of like thinking of differences between Japanese and Korean educational sites, we should think about from the point of like importance of educational institutions in both countries. And I think of the way like the advanced studies of Confucian texts were implemented are also very important. So like I just like I'm just gonna really conclude now. So today, as nowadays in our world, the educational systems are very needed in the world, but the way how they are going to develop and how they're going to be inscribed, it's so it has a like. I think that the UNESCO World Heritage List has the potential to teach the world important lessons as the various countries consider how to develop educational systems that will help humankind address today's and tomorrow's global challenges. I'm thinking especially about like the following characteristics. Like first would be diverse institutions catering to the different needs of society's members, while at the same time cultivating a basis of shared values. So different needs, but basis of shared values. And second would be institutions that support the society that created them, but that once society begins to transform, will adapt to change and even help bring it about. So the change is very different, very important. And third would be institutions that are, like it might be a bit difficult, but that are unique in what they reflect the unique geographical, historical, like, and social conditions that created them and that they support. So that's like about the uniqueness. But the characteristics phenomena themselves, if examined one by one, are likely to have equivalents elsewhere. What is unique is a particular combination of those characteristics. This and fourth is this unique combination of universally intelligible characteristics is what gives the proposed site both uniqueness and universal value. And again, I repeat, what most important is to combine both uniqueness and universal value. So therefore, together with other sites, it will help illustrate the diversity of educational institutions and initiatives on a global level and throughout history. So the main point here is the diversity of educational institutions and initiatives. And history, especially, is important here. Because I'm a historian, maybe it's like just Captain, like, maybe I was stating the obvious, but the properties also remind us that the early modern era was very different from the present. And we need to like actually keep that in mind. This should heighten our awareness of transformation as well as continuity. In every time and place, education is subject to criticism and new approaches are considered. Studying our global educational heritage is also like understanding that even if plans for reform seems like castles in the air, like which I mentioned earlier, initially they might look like castles in the air, but much needed change is achievable if you imagine and if you use your imaginative force. And I firmly believe in that. So that's the end of my keynote speech. Thank you so much for your attention.
メール先生、ありがとうございました。
Thank you so much. We would like to take questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. Here is a question. Kyoto University. Very interesting speech. Thank you so much. I have a question. The early modern Japan heritage group, there are something physical size. They are physical things, but there are something that intangible. For example, there are something that you can't see. What do you think about that? And I also want to ask other people, and that means that there's something that is tangible and something that are not intangible. So do you think about that? I think the specialist of the teachers can answer the question. Hashimoto Sensei, thank you so much. Thank you for the question. Intangible properties, and it is a really difficult question for us. And we want to talk about it later. As Mio Sensei said just now, and the criteria of the World Heritage, and its outstanding universal value, but there's something that we can see and also something that we can't see. We will talk about it later. At the beginning of the speech, Mio Sensei said about a castle in the air. And I got the question. I also want to ask a question. That in order to draw the dream of education, do you think it will be helpful for us? Do you have anything that surprised you? Exactly. In case of Juku, as Obala said that, basically the place is very small. The normal Juku, just like normal human's home, but in fact, a lot of people live here, and the teacher and the students live there together like family members. even like childhood, they learn from their parents. For example, in case of universities, in 30 years of Japan, there are factories in Europe. It's very big space, but in case of Japan, for Joko, the space is very small. But the day before yesterday, I heard about that the space is very light because the sunsets come in, and it's a very comfortable place. And in order to answer this, we need to learn it further. It is a place to study and also they need to make the students to feel comfortable and have some rest. This kind of space, we see the size, the people there designed that. How did they design that? We think about that. Some schools in earlier Japan, in modern Japan, such as Taisho period, there are some concepts maybe come from that. We are running out of time. And I would like to conclude this lecture.
Now, let's move on to our second keynote speech. It will be given by Mr. Dino Bombaro. Mr. Bombaro is originally from Canada. He majored in architecture and architectural conservation studies and has served as the chairman of the Canadian National Committee of ICOMOSO, which is the International Council on Monuments and Sites. He was also executive director of ICOMOS and is currently the policy director of Heritage Montreal. Mr. Bombaro has been involved in many surveys and examinations for World Heritage Inscription. And in Japan, he has cooperated with Tomioka Silk Mill and related sites, which was recognized as a World Heritage Site in 2014. He is also involved in the inscription of Japan's World Heritage Sites, including participating in an expert meeting for the registered sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution, iron and steel, shipbuilding, and coal mining in 2015. So today, Mr. Bombaro will be giving a keynote speech entitled Educational Heritage as a World Heritage Site, the case of the educational heritage of early modern Japan. Sekiguchi-san, thank you so much.
Speak in Japanese, and but I would like to very very sincerely thank the organizer. The mayor are with us, so the council, and also the staff of the various municipalities, and Mito and Bizen in particular for the hospitality they have showed in guiding me personally and together with other colleagues on this exercise. The theme of school heritage is very important. You know, tomorrow is the International UN Day of the Right of the Children, and we have memories of our childhood in this room with us, and the memory of us in the school, and this is also part of the human dimension of this exercise, so how we can connect. And I would like, before entering, to sort of pick up on a few points that Margaret raised, and I'll bring the memory of past Secretary General of ICOMOS and Canadian Chair of ICOMOS Canada, Herb Stovall. Herb Stovall was the one of the co-writer of the NARA document on authenticity of 1994. And at one point, I was chatting with him, because he's from Montreal also, about the, he was doing some work on the Edinburgh World Heritage nomination. There was no Harry Potter in those days, so he had to focus on real stuff. And what he was telling me, sharing with me, because he had studied in Edinburgh, and he say, the nomination is about the building, but they forget the university. They look at the building of it, but they don't realize the importance of the Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh in changing the world with technological, with training, engineering, and so on. And it is a bit connected to our discussion, is how we look at something, and perhaps there are many realities associated with it. Herb Stovall also in 1995 participated in an exercise we had in Montreal with Christina Cameron and other leaders in the World Heritage community to derive for our own city what are the lessons we can draw from the World Heritage context. We did that because people think about nomination, and there's a lot of effort and value in this, but World Heritage is also a shareware library of incredible amount of experience, reflection. It's accessible. Those days there was not so much of internet, you know, internet, and we started in ICOMOS in 1992, so in 1995 it was very, very early. Probably in Japan you were already moving at Shinkansen speed into it, but we have to deal with our own reality. And in this meeting, Herb Stovall, at that time, UNESCO and the World Heritage Community was developing the global strategy. And what we are discussing today is connected to those periods: authenticity, integrity, global strategy, credibility. These are words. I want to thank the interpreter because I'm going to move rather often out of my text. So thank you very much, and in advance. And two things that Herb Stovall mentioned is one, outstanding universal value, and it relates to what Margaret mentioned. He says it can be read as the exceptional part of the phrase, outstanding. It's something which is it's the Taj Mahal type. You know, there's only one Taj Mahal and there's only one Kasura or something. But he says the other world is universal, and universal, it means it can speak to many cultures. It can speak of the human species and the human endeavor. And this is part of our challenge. Education is a very big theme, and I'll, you know, perhaps also a little personal experience. Some years ago, I was walking around near my office in Montreal, and I passed by this wonderful Art Deco school. You know, the City Hall here in Kyoto is a wonderful Art Deco building with its own style, different from the Art Deco we had. And it was a school built in the 1920s. And the workers were removing the wonderful Art Deco lettering because the administration of the school board had decided to change the name of the school, so the lettering was going to the garbage. And these were letters that were very well made by craftsmen in bronze. And So we saw that as a heritage organization. We also received citizen alert saying that this was happening. And we called the school board chair and we said, what are you doing? And in the end, what they did is we lost the letters, but they created a heritage expert committee to advise them on the heritage of education. Because so much, education is a gigantic topic. It's one of the transversal theme in society. As was mentioned earlier, it's the letter E in UNESCO and so on. But very often we look at it as a supply of services, activities. It's the software of education. It's the budget of education. It's the staffing of education. And it's the issue of certified diploma, so all this thing. And we forget about the building, the places, and even their names somehow are lost. Maybe different in Japan. I can tell you in our case, it was a bit of a revolutionary action to have the school board, which handles a budget of maybe $800 million per year, to realize that they were trustees of a heritage of society. So that was a little condition in which the notion of educational heritage is also located. Who are the keeper, who are the operator, and who keep it alive. I'll give you another anecdote. This is a stamp I bought in Montreal some weeks ago. And I bought it because it's a series of stamps that show school building. And so I say, at last, the Canadian Post Society publishes stamps with building on them, so I'm so happy. And so I buy the whole thing and I read it. And what it's about truth and reconciliation. We feel that sometimes school is always a positive thing, but in some country, in particular in Canada, for instance, the school system was also used as a way to control people or eliminate culture. So there was a policy since the 19th century until the 1980s for the police to go and take the children away from the indigenous family and put them in schools where they would be standardized. So they were not allowed to speak their language. And nowadays there's been a bit like inspired by Nelson Mandela in South Africa, there's been a consciousness of this situation, and we are in a reconciliation. So these schools are not there just for the beauty of their architecture. They are there because they carry the memory of sad moment in history. And it's something that we may need to be realizing, is that today the heritage has got different facets, and we want to be conscious. I'm not saying that the proposition is always to be on everything, but we have to be conscious of them. Now, there will be some more slides also, but I want to perhaps point out this is the annual report of my organization, Heritage Montreal, is almost 50 years old, and we've been around. It's a citizen group, so we are part of one of the 5 clans, if you want, that make up the heritage action system. There's the public sector, there's the academic sector. These are the old power involved in the heritage discussion, but more and more we acknowledge there is the private sector, the community sector, and the media, the spaces of communication, which are very important. And so our organization is part of the NGO clan, and the cover page is that of this school here. You can see a building from the drawing from the 19th century. It was founded in 1822, so it's a period that relates to some of the discussion that we have been having here. I'm not saying that there was a connection, but it's just to say there were discussion in the spirit of those days. And it's called the British and Canadian School. It was built in the 1820s. And I would just illustrate, in July, the Minister of Culture, in the case of Canada, protection of heritage is a shared responsibility. So the federal government does some of the designation, but they are very often without power to protect because it's a provincial power. And the provinces, they define if the law is under the Minister of Culture, under the Minister of Environment, or the Minister of Education, or Minister of Community, or it depends on the province. In the case of Quebec, my province, it's under the Minister of Culture. And last July, the Minister of Culture designated, using the power of the law, this school. It's one of the first schools to be designated in the province. And it's actually the oldest purpose-built school that are in the whole province and one of the oldest in Canada. Why do I bring this? It's just to say there are different facets, different dimensions to the heritage value. In the case of this one, there is a historical value which is somehow I can hear some of our discussion in that case. You know, it was an avant-garde educational concept where boys and girls were studying together in the 1820s, where French-speaking and English-speaking were being taught in both languages, where Catholic and Protestant, that's even the worst thing. In our case, it was very, very significant that the religious barrier were lifted so that the children would study together, have a common education, and most of all, it was also a school built to be accessible to the poorest people. So it was a bit of a revolutionary concept. It was inspired by a British and foreign school society discussion. It was, you could see that there were probably movement around the world and expansion of concept and theory about that. And well, it operated until the 1890s in that avant-garde model, where the rest of the education system was becoming more and more clustered. Boys and girls separate, Catholic and Protestant separate. Catholic and Protestant were separate until the 1990s. So it was a very, very important structural division. And the issue of language. Then after, there's another value, historical value that came. The building was transformed into a factory, and eventually it became a Chinese noodle factory. So I know you say, what is this discussion? It's so crazy. This is not San Francisco, this is Montreal, but this is the oldest, a very old Chinese community arrived with the construction of the railways in the 1870s and 80s. But the noodle factory that came, and I know some of you specialists in education will say, well, that's a metaphor of the educational system. You turn from an avant-garde education system into a noodle factory. We all know the joke. But in that particular case, there was another dimension, is that the Chinese community started producing the first fortune cookie bilingual. So both in French and English and Chinese. So imagine it's a little anecdote, but it says the minister in the statement of designation, which is an equivalent at the level of our province of the OUV statement at the international level, identified a number of these dimensions. And there is also the architectural value, because in those days they choose the best architect to do this. They did not put an avant-garde school project for poor people in a shed. They asked for the builder of the cathedral to design this. And I think it's important to see that there are examples like that that connects different dimensions. And perhaps it's a word that I haven't heard so much in our discussion, but I would suggest to keep in our mind when discussing early modern Japan, and it's the notion of pioneer, the notion of experimentation, social experimentation, the notion of avant-garde, and the notion of towards the future. Margaret said that education is about the future. Well, that's a good thing, because that's the business of conservation. We are often being pointed as people who love the past. It's not that I don't care for the past, but I cannot change it, whereas we can build the future. And so the issue of heritage and education, in that sense, they connect with each other. But don't forget, there are different dimensions to those places, good and bad memories, and so on. So, the recognition is that we are not talking, I heard the comment about the intangible, I'll come back to that later, but our action here is centered on places. There are different, the field of heritage is a very broad one, but I would suggest we keep in mind these three words, territory, society, and history, place, people, and time. And these are the three dimensions that meet at one point, and this is where heritage architecture, landscape, there are different type of thing we are considering as society as important actually are shaped, whether it's an historic building or a modern building, it is always somewhere. It was designed with a program which has a meaning in society, and it is lasting, so it goes through time, and it has sources. So it's the same thing with, and this is a reduction. Of course, we cannot oversimplify things, but having these three words together gives us a space where we know we will have to look after the three dimensions simultaneously. I'll give you an example of place is where is the school in the neighborhood. This is a school in Montreal in a worker neighborhood, and you see just across the street is the church. Next to the church was the convent. In front of the church was the bank. Very often, the bank became a cooperative banking system as the result of the community activity happening around the church and the school. And so nowadays, we don't know what to do with our churches. Our schools are lacking maintenance, as you can see. But in the end, we realized that we cannot look only at the church or the school. We have to look at the core of the village or the core of the neighborhood. So it's an idea of geography. Another one is where do we place these institutional buildings? This is just the University of Montreal. This is my university. I'm very proud to show it. It's a postcard. It was developed with as a bit of a citizen or private initiative, but now it's one of the largest French-speaking universities in the world. And it benefited from the help of the Rockefeller Foundation, so international support in the development of educational institutions and so on. That might be also a theme to consider. But if you look at the shape of it and the position, it is on top of the hill, so it dominates. So instead of putting the military or the church or the king on top of the hill, you put knowledge. The positioning of these places in the landscape often mean, when we visited the academy the other day, it was clear that it's important to understand, we talk about the little stream in front as part of the symbolic micro-landscape, but the setting is an important thing, whether it's a village, a town, or a neighborhood, it's an interesting thing. And also the shape, the architecture is because the school was, the university was imagined as having a hospital component, so that you have knowledge of clinical development as well as theoretical. The guy who designed this building is the one who designed the doors of the United Nations Secretariat, if you like useless trivia. Tangible, intangible. I would suggest that we, not to separate things, but just to have a series of keywords in our mind. Because the World Heritage System is based on the tangible, and it is based on the immovable. It doesn't mean that anything else is not important. It's just that in 1972, when they started this initiative, or they had the convention, they made some choice, and these are choices that are engaged in a long journey. And when you see how the convention is gradually evolving, not as a convention, but through its operational guideline, and this is where a lot of the source of our discussion is going to stand, well, you end up realizing that there is a greater understanding that heritage is not just a physical, immovable artifact. It's connected to communities, it's connected to memories, it's connected to archives, it's connected to rituals, to habit. So they interweave, but the nomination, like if you take the most obvious thing is the, let's say, a church or a cathedral, you know, an old Gothic cathedral. Let's say the cathedral in Durham in the UK. It's on the World Heritage List. Well, nobody put Jesus Christ on the World Heritage List, nor the religion. They put the cathedral for a number of reasons. And the same thing with, they have not put Lord Buddha on the list, but they have put the birthplace of Buddha because it's a site that has meaning, and the meaning was argumented and developed and so on. But in the intangible, I think it's important to realize that the education system has been not only a generator of knowledge, but also a generator of rituals. If you look at many universities in Europe, the uniform of some of the schools in Japan, for instance, that's an example. The habit of the salute to the national flag or national anthem or prayer, whatever, you know. Some of these traditions are a continuation perhaps of monastic life of the previous age, but extended to youth when the student of the university on specific day in the program, they go out and they collect donation to give to the poor after, which used to be a job the monk used to do. So it's interesting to look at this system, and I think it's important to see it as an ecosystem of components and practices. I suggest to keep this keyword. What could be a place? You know, does education need a school? In many countries, a tree will do the job. You know, how much teaching is happening in many countries, in Africa, in Latin America, in traditional society, that just take a place that is significant in the middle of the village so the elder can pass the knowledge to the younger. This is a form of school without the windows, well, or with the 100% window. World Heritage, of course, is a bit more of a codified structure, and we live with that. We have to live with this because it's an agreement between almost 200 countries. You cannot just say everybody will invent their own thing. There has to be some rule. Otherwise, it's like in the classroom, you know, there has to be a bit of a professor and a mentor and some direction. And here I would suggest, let's go through these things. We've spoken about OUV. Now, OUV, as said, is it universality or commonality or a dosing of things? In the case of a series, we'll come back to that. The OUV is for the whole group. So it has to be meaningful as a group, not just as individual thing. And the question will be, is it justified? And there's a series of work that has to be done. The council exists for a long time, so you're familiar with this, but it's important to remember that I think fine-tuning will be a bit of a challenge here, because people confuse OUV with ONV. And I'm not saying ONV, I'm saying ONV as outstanding national value. And many places you visit, you ask a guide to give you an idea of what is the important site is on the World Heritage List. What they will tell you is the local heroes, the national program, the national story, and we don't know why this should be of importance to me, a foreigner. And I think this is a bit of a challenge because a lot of the knowledge is nation-based, and so we know we have a challenge collectively in many countries, societies, about teaching history. But here we have to be a bit of a challenge ourselves about that. Authenticity and integrity. This has to do with the site itself and the property which is proposed as a mean to communicate. And a lot of our discussion somehow is how do we communicate to people who don't exist? You know, in Canada nowadays, it's increasingly being referred how the First Nations are the indigenous people. There is that principle of making decision for the benefit of the 7th generation. And so how do we imagine you would work a lot, it will be very hard work, you know, a lot of the hard work that is involved in preparing some proposal like this one, sorry to say, there will still be more hard work for you. And be ready to help, but somehow there's hard work and it cannot be taken on a contract. It has to be you people that do it. How you communicate to those people. And this was the discussion of authenticity. What is the source? What is the dimension that make it reliable to the future? And integrity is the physical condition. You know, are pieces missing? Is a group together? And it has to be demonstrated somehow. But I see there's already, in the paper we've received, there's already a beginning. And protection and management, I will not go very far in that because, frankly, Japan has got some of the best system in place. It's no reason to work hard. You know, you cannot just rest and say Japan is good and that's enough, because the inspection will come and they will say, well, maybe Japan was good, but this site needs attention. But the fact that cities are cooperating, the notion of a council is very often a sign of the capacity to learn together, to exchange best practice and so on, and to make sure that the guarantee to the future is there. Now, for the OUV, there are 10 criteria, but 6 of them apply to this type of discussion because 4 of them are more for natural property. You know, the history of geology or the natural habitat and biodiversity, and criterion 7 about outstanding natural beauty, which personally I don't know why beauty is only attached to nature. It's like a legacy of the divine. Only God can be beautiful, and if there's no God, well, then it should be nature. But let's focus on the first 6 one, and we'll see very clearly that where the efforts stand. You know, the masterpiece of human genius, we're talking of, again, Taj Mahal, we're talking of Sydney Opera House, you know, some of these individual creation. It doesn't apply only to building. It can be a city, it can be, you know, but I think this is not part of our work. The interchange of human value over a period of time in a world area, it has not been demonstrated. Maybe there are, well, you know, as was demonstrated, the case of the Korean inscription is interesting because it shows there were flows of interchange and communication and models that were shared. But is it, well, probably there has to be some more articulation. The testimony of a tradition or civilization, especially when it disappears, well, I'm not sure, but perhaps there is that, the teaching, and a type illustrating the stage of history. So I think there might be more, actually many of the sites that are of the very, very few sites on the list that relate to education, explore the dimension of that criterion 4. The traditional human settlement, unless you have, let's say, an educational teaching facility as a settlement, perhaps the notion of monastic community can be used as a reference and could be interesting to see. Association to ideas, tradition, of course, there's a lot of, in there, but that's not a criteria that will implicitly lead to inscription. So this is a supplementary criteria. So 4, perhaps 5 is somewhere that where the work is to be done. Because it's a group, I think it's important. There's been over the past few years an increased interest in the tool of the serial nomination. And this has meant that UNESCO, with the advisory body, have worked to clarify the guidance on how to present it, what are the dimensions that are sought. And these are, I didn't write this. This is the official document from last September, so 2 months ago. And you see, it's a notion of component parts should reflect cultural, social, or functional links over time. And I'll come back to the notion of links. It doesn't have to be a mechanical link. As I was introduced, I had the privilege and honor to contribute to the Tomioka and related site nomination. There, the links were more, it was a lot of work to describe them, to show how the things were, the components were connected. But the connection was almost like the connection of a machine. How you produce silk, where you grow, you have the silkworm, the eggs, the farm, the factory, how they connect in terms of a process. What is proposed here is not that type of link, but there has to be a demonstration. The series as a whole should have an outstanding universal value, and I think it will challenge us to look at the period, the pioneering message, how it participates. It doesn't have to be the source, but how does it participate to a reflection on how you educate young people in society. That's the society dimension. And also it's important to clarify how the proposal was articulated. What is the selection criteria? It's not just it happened that people were interested, we grouped them in a room, we locked the room, and that was the proposal. It has to be justified. If these are actually the sixth site that requires, that will make the proposal, the rationale is there. The comparative analysis is very important, and I know in the document there's been a beginning of that, but probably it would be good to adjust it or complete it. And integrity, we'll come back to that, the notion of intactness and wholeness. So these are concepts, but as you say, ChatGPT cannot answer this. Well, so far. So how do you appreciate these qualities and so on is the challenge. I'll use this as an example. Probably if you go around, we go around the room, we say, what's the link to education? Well, not much, except that in order to drive a car, you need a permit, so you need to learn somewhere. But this is actually a World Heritage Site in Asmara, in Eritrea. It's part of the modern capital city. And it is when many people are being presented with the notion of modern, this is the kind of image that comes to mind. It's the Museum of Western Art in Tokyo. It's modern architecture. So it's a word that has different meaning, and I understand in the Japanese context or in an historical context, by historian it's used differently than by architects or heritage managers. So it's, these are the element I could point out that may connect to the concept of heritage of education in the World Heritage List. That's the list that was completed just in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a couple of weeks ago. So, as mentioned, the Sewon in Korea, it dates from 2009. You'll see that most of these sites are from the last 10, 15 years. So they're recent nomination inscriptions. So there's a lot of documentation. They're perhaps more closer to the current discussion on the operational guideline, the concepts and so on, than if you had nomination like the Bauhaus in 1996. It was almost a different world in terms of the intellectual framework of the World Heritage system. But 2009 for Sewon, it was the period covered is 16th to 17th century. It has the quality of being from the Asian region, so it's not some Coimbra in Portugal. It's a living university campus, and we will see on the list that universities are much more present than school. So I'm thinking again of what are the rights of the children tomorrow being celebrated when we only talk of universities. People are born, they take nappies and then jump to the university directly, or what is the different sequence in which you build not only human being, but citizens, skillful person and creative minds. So Coimbra is a living university campus. The period is from the 12th to the 20th century. It's almost a city. Actually, it is a city. And then the modern educational site are, as you can see, mostly related to 20th century construction. Really, that's a good reminder that life is short. The last one to be included is the Saniketan University campus in India, which is a project of philosopher Tagore. So it also happens that Mr. I think Narendra Modi is the chair of the board of that university, and the inscription took place on his birthday. So I don't know, I'm just saying, you know, it's an observation, but it was celebrated as such during the World Heritage Committee. The tentative list, I counted it yesterday night. Once again, there's about 1,700 sites on that list. And as you can see, the education is really not present. You have about 1,700 sites. Where is education? So I think there's a great opportunity for Japan, just like Japan did in the 1990s. I mean, we had the conference in Nara because Japan said to the rest of the world, authenticity is an issue that is worth discussing globally, and we will host this meeting so that we will, and please stop saying Japan buildings are all brand new because they rebuild it every 25 years. This is Ise Shrine, and that's a ritual. It's not, you know, it was because Japan had the guts, excuse me in my expression, but to tell the rest of the world we can discuss a common topic. And I think the heritage of education would be a good thing, especially since Bunkacho, all the heritage system in Japan is connected to the administration of education. This is a wonderful opportunity. But if you look at this, what do we have? The Ministry of Education building in Rio de Janeiro. It's the building in which Le Corbusier and Lucio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer were involved, so it's a masterpiece of architecture. The School of Art in Cuba is a project of Che Guevara, so the idea behind it is important, but it's also an achievement of an architect that did extraordinary forms. So it's very much the architecture and the instigator. And then a series of university campuses. I think university campuses are more frequent because more professors who makes research and develop knowledge are in university than schools. So, and university are powerful lion in the society. But I think, you know, perhaps as a way a couple of recommendations without closing before the last ring comes. I think my perception is that there's still some work on the justification of the group as a group. The OUV of the whole, not the ONV, be careful with that. And a lot of the historical significance is related to the software of these places, the memory of their founder, the nature of the organization. That is important, but it has to be better connected and reinforced. The selection rationale to make sure what's there is what should be there and nothing, and it's complete. The links within the group, again, please don't imagine only mechanical links or something. There can be, you know, a relation because it's in the same time frame and they participated in a change in society rather than an individual initiative. And the notion of influences. So how does it relate inside, within Japan, but also outside? Influences received, influences sent. That would be interesting. For instance, in the case of the previous Modern Japan project I was involved, every time the notion of Van Gogh came out, you know, the Vincent van Gogh, the painter, and how the dissemination of images of Japanese culture done through the print has changed the concept of art and modern art in Europe because of the exchange of model. That's an example of influences that may not be anticipated but should be perhaps explored. I would suggest clarifying the historical reference, early modern Japan, and compared to modern World Heritage, and how does this initiative here compares to what was happening in other countries, even if they're not connected? Maybe if we take the benefit of a global panorama, do we see that this was, there was a mention that this was some of the sites were among the first free schools for commoner in the world. That would be very interesting to demonstrate. And, oh no, yes, sorry. I tried to change it, but I'm not very good at this. What's there? Okay, that's better. Sorry, thank you so much.
文原先生、ありがとうございました。ここで会場からご質問をお受けしたいと思います。質問のある方がいらっしゃいましたら、挙手をお願いいたします。
Also, the teachers, if you have any questions, please. It seems like there's no questions. If you have any questions, you can ask us during the coffee break time. And now let's conclude the speech of Banbaro Sensei. Let's applaud together. It's time to take a break here. We will reopen at 3 o'clock. Please.
So as we said, we'll take a short break now. The symposium will start at 3 p.m. sharp, so please return to your seats by then. Thank you very much.
いや、大丈夫でしょう。それではただいまから
Now we will start a panel discussion. The coordinator for panel discussion will be Hashimoto Akihiko Sensei, academic research at Japan Women's University. Next, I would like to introduce the panelists who will be participating from Japan. First of all, Okayama University of Science Special Professor Etsula Tsuguto. Next, Tokyo Gakko University Emeritus Professor OEC Manabu. Next, Kokushikan University Emeritus Professor Okada Yasuyoshi. Now, I will hand over the proceeding to Hashimoto Sensei. Thank you so much. So I have to talk while sitting. Today, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for Mel Sensei and Bumble Sensei. Thank you for the speech. Just as we introduced that we have submitted the proposal in 2020, and also the English version. We thought that the proposal was very good, but when we wanted to make it be understood by the by the overseas professors, we are not sure if it's understandable for overseas experts. That's why we invited the overseas experts to come here and to see how are we evaluated by overseas experts by this symposium. For me, especially for my group, about the heritage registration, there are some questions, especially from the Agency of Cultural Affairs. There are two questions. One is about the OUV. When we introduce this to overseas experts, is there any meaning? And we also think there's some issues to talk about. And the other is traditional value. There, because we are talking about properties, can the properties explain the traditional value? Or can we say, how do we explain the value by the Meiji periods, of the schools and also the properties in Meiji period? And the other one is about there are 6 properties here. Are there 6 properties enough or not? And we always be asked about these 2 issues. And please talk about it freely, especially we are talking about the theme of today. please talk from your fields. And at last, let's come back to the issues of these two and have some conclusion. Please talk about it from now. Who should talk first? What about the order? How should we talk about the order? Oi-sensei, please. Edo period is my field. Edo period is maybe we have an impression that it's a very new consideration about the concept. Meiji, after Meiji and before Meiji, there are two modern periods, early modern and after that. And let's see about the Meiji. Now there are a lot of issues such as environmental issues and also the Israel problems and the war and the human lives, militaries, and the modernization. How do we think about it by modernization? How people live a better life or not? When we think about it at the period, we should think about it again. And the 200 years, more than 200 years, and there are war inside, even inside the country. That's why when we think about the issues, we should think about it, put it into the context. When the era changed, our consideration all changed. In Edo period, we can see that it is a peaceful period. The peace continued for more than 100 years. And it is a era that people become richer. And at that period, when people are killed, then it is a crime. But maybe it is different during the war. So now we can think that time has changed. And also there's
So we need to think about the historical influence on our country coming from, for example, from China. We had a lot big wars, and if you think about wars in the perspective of a cultural heritage and educational heritage, we need to think about the external influence that was imposed on Japan. And from that, how that influence came from all the way from Edo period to the modern times. And if you think about Edo period, it's quite it was a quite unique community which has influenced a lot of our modern education nowadays. So we need to think about the energy which influence peace in the world and in terms of the educational system. So if you think about it, so if you think about our city Bizen, and so I think that education is basically a huge force which is influencing the world we're living in at the moment. So thank you. So if as if it stated that during the Edo period, the peace started in Japan. So does anybody else have a similar opinion or something, some other comment about the educational system in the early modern period as well? For example, like we can maybe Professor Izura can speak from the scientific approach. Hi, I'm Izura. As already was introduced earlier, my major is Japanese architecture. So if you think about like tangible things, like that's my major. So I've listened to all the professors, and as Mr. Bombaro was saying, that you shouldn't just over-focus on the tangible thing. So I started thinking, like, how do you justify, like, for something to become educational site if it's intangible? So in my opinion, like educational, so for me, educational system is actually based on the architecting the school itself. And if the architecture, like if the design is not very successful, though, that it will influence the school itself. So if you think about building a school, there are a few points which are very clear to me. And if we speak about it a bit more with Professor Mel, like, and so I realize that there's like some things that I myself need to learn more. And but in a nutshell, my opinion is that it's not a clear like point that everyone agrees on, but educational heritage is that in Japan it has its own like style. That in Japan we were like. I can speak about it for like more than an hour or two, but if I like just put it in a nutshell, can I? May I? Oh, okay. So coordinator will just maybe let us know how to speak and at what point about it. But Izuru-sensei wants to talk about it later. Dear attendees, please look at the pamphlets you have at here. So if you think about it, what Japanese people have something to be proud of, it's written in the page, like one, I think. So, for example, especially about the early modern educational heritage side. So during the Edo period, where like we established like a scripted culture, like a culture based on letters. And basically the literacy went up at that time, and population was like more and more people were able to read and write. And that impacted the community as whole, like, so that was like one of the points of Edo period. And second point is that like that the educational system back in the Edo period was such that the community and the nature were in a harmony. So while we were trying to like keep the traditions going on, at the same time we were accepting more and more people of different like social backgrounds and age. And because of that, there was more and more opportunities for more people to learn and to receive education. And that was the, in a nutshell, like early modern Japanese educational heritage. So if you think about the outstanding universal values, that I think for us is one of the most important points. So for that, if we think about it like how to explain the heritage from the things, like tangible things, like we would like to speak more about how to review educational heritage in early modern Japan, like starting from the building of a school and the like all the equipments that were available for students in those schools back then. So that's what Sadhuru Sensei is studying. Maybe if anyone can speak more about outstanding universal values. Maybe Professor Okada. I'm Okada. Thank you. So I would like to speak about components. Like in Japan, we have like old buildings and they're still intact, but it's not just like a look of that building, but the history that they bring inside and what the story that we are telling through time and space. So if you think about the tangibility, since we have the building, that's a thing already, right? But it's not just that. Like a thing would be also like the surroundings of that building. So in those 4 cities, we have these 4 local sites which are telling a special story. So if you think about the thing, it has a wider meaning. And Mitsuru would like also add that building and all is just like are parts of storytelling. For example, like different styles in architecture that we brought in and accepted from Chinese culture as well. Like there are 2 points about that. Like I think many of you know already, but Japanese juku schools, like that we spoke about today, like I guess we call them private schools. So basically, like we took the Chinese style and implemented it in our local surroundings. It's the same in Shizutani and in Kodokan as well. Basically, we took something from abroad influence, but shaped it into our local color. And it's actually quite different from the education itself, like the way that education was provided. So if you look at the different other Asian countries like China or Korea or Vietnam, so if you like compare like their traditions in old and early and modern times, we can see the unique specifications of each country and value that each country's early modern education held. So as we said before, like it's like the times were different and historical context is also very different. So the school itself is not just a building, but like its look, how it looks, and how the education process are organized. So if we compare to like our schools, Shizutani Gakko is it's like being based in a like that look is very specific. For example, the 3 walls are closed and there's only 1 wall is open. So that type of the shape itself is very unique. So people who are coming from outside, they like join the school. And it's not like we just copy it the way like Chinese schools used to be. We actually change it to our local traditions and to be able to view our beautiful Japanese landscape while studying as well. So if you think about it, not just schools, but for example, the landscape around it and the graveyard and the temples. So like for us, the education was based on like religion, I would say, that like we were getting educated together with a God. So we were just like creating like a environment both for tension and relaxation. So the way the Japanese people perceived the world was implemented into how we created our educational ground, even if we got influenced by people abroad. And that unique perceiving of things is like something which makes our educational sites different. So we took that influence that we received from abroad, like we actually interpreted in quite a free way by building our early modern schools. And one more thing is that the space of for education is it's not just like we are like Professor Mel said earlier. Like if you look at the pictures, like you'll see the schools which are very different in abroad.
学習
There's some environment about the education. Just like Shizuoka University, the space is big, but about the Duke, we just use a very normal home for the commoners to study. And yesterday, the day before yesterday, we visited Shizutani, and we found that there are some separate spaces from the space that where people learn. And, there are some spaces for normal people. So this kind of spaces is very Japanese. Yeah, there's another word, tokoroma, in Japanese. Maybe some of you don't understand what that means. Yeah, there are some spaces just like tokoroma. Use some of the space of normal home. I want to talk more, but the time is limited. Thank you so much. Educational space was talking about just now, and just like we introduced just now, because through education we want to achieve a lot of goals. We put a lot of things inside Japan, but also we change it according to our Japanese style. So can we say that it is just very Japanese style, just like the space? We mean, yes, I mean that we learn something from other countries, but we also change it and make it comfort for the learning. And also make it to learn inside. let me introduce it more. I want to show some of the slides. We can see that it's written guest room. It is very clear that there's a space, a learning space. It's just like a classroom. This kind of space, like we talk about it before, it's for commoners. We can see this kind of space like Tokoroma. We can see it everywhere in Japan. Or even in Okinawa. In Japan, we can see there's no space, there's no place that don't have this kind of space. Just like what Mel said, that yes, it's used. The normal home was used. It's for the commoners. Hanshu and officials is it's normal, but this kind of thing is not for Hanshu, it's for commoners. And so I think it's very special. And this is place that designated for commoners. This is Olanchiko in Hiroshima professor. We can see that the teacher sitting inside, and we can see the wall is behind the teacher, and see the Tokoroma. And we can see Tokoroma even in China or in Korea. And I thought that maybe Tokoroma is from China, but it's not. It's invented in Japan. Yeah. I heard that is from the concept that the concept that the teacher always sit inside and the students outside, not outside, just around. When you see that, you can see this is another slide used in Symposium. This also shows something about Tokoroma. There's some space for commoners. It means that it is a development that there's not only space for Hanshu, but also for commoners. It is a place for education of the commoners. That means that the education is for everyone and everywhere. So I understand, and I'd like to explain like this. Maybe my thoughts may have something with this. You can see your pamphlet, the page. There's some. Please watch your pamphlet. And we told from the Agency of Cultural Affairs. And we can see that maybe at that time, at the period that we have already reached the goals that education for every people transcend the ages, the classes, and also the places. Maybe we think that there's no education for farmers, but also there are something textbook for farmers and also for commerce. And also the concept is that you can quit any time that you want. There's no concept about competition, but about the people being together, learn together. And people learned there become the writers. And people graduated from there. They after that went to different places, and they want to keep it. And also they developed it. Maybe they open their own schools, and also there are some hanshu. They also open the schools. The concept is about everyone, everywhere can learn. It means that people learn by themselves, take the initiative to learn by themselves. Yeah, I'm so surprised that there are schools inside the mountains. People walk a long way, even risk their life to go to that school to learn. But I was surprised that I thought that why people they want to learn so much. But even foreigners can't understand that why they want to learn so much, because I think it's because has become a lifestyle of their time. By this means, the society become very peaceful, and also the individual, they are eager to learn.
So if you think about the education during Edo period, there are many points coming out which are very interesting. But if you can also look at our book that we prepared and the pamphlet. So it's actually interesting to think that can we like we would like to learn actually from our professors as well, but actually there is like a question like, is 6 components enough or no? And if we can discuss that in the remaining time, that would be great. Can we please ask from Professor Okada? So in my opinion, if I listen to like Professor Hashimoto now, to us, actually those 6 components might be like a problem that we need to start solving from now on. If Professor Bumbar said, and in his last argument, like why Japanese educational heritage, like why is it like necessary to bring up those 4 components for inscription in the World Heritage Site? So I thought that's exactly what we need to discuss and what we need to solve from now on. in that basically in that group, a little bit more of historical flow is important. So if you look at the pamphlet, like Professor Oishi pointed out earlier, so like the way that they're listed, those educational sites are all different, and the way that those schools were preserved is very different. If you know, like Ashikaga school, it remained as a heritage site, but it's not working as a school anymore. And in some cases, like there's a lot of parts is remaining, but not as a whole. So in Mameda College Town, it's a whole block. But how much of that block is actually connected to the educational heritage site? And if you think about Kangien, that most of the area is connected to that image, but how are the buildings are being preserved and how are they going to be preserved from now on becomes an issue. So that way, like the way that the buildings are preserved, they have very different styles of that. And because we put in a group, today I thought like we put those schools all together in the same group, but they actually have very different historical background. And Ashikaga Gakko has a very long span of the existence, especially like think about Kangien and Kodokan of 19th century schools, like the way that Japanese entire educational system has changed. Like those would be like more like a early modern sites compared to Ashikaga. So those were all sites which were providing education to people in need. But so can we say that it was happening the entire early modern period, or from the end of Edo period, that the opportunity of getting education maybe it was different back then? Because it depends on the particular period inside the larger period. So as a topic of discussion, the serial was like, is it like enough to have those components, and also did they have a similar or same like influence on the society at the same like Edo period or no? So basically, I just realized that we have to analyze each school in the historical context of that particular small period. So, what do you think about that, Mr. Boomber? Our like components, and are we like successful in bringing up that to the OUV?
Take too much time. I've already spoken a lot, but a question I have is there in Japan, because we're talking of a bit of a centralized government structure model, there must be an inventory of the school heritage and educational heritage somewhere where it's possible to make comparison, to structure thematic analysis, and to imagine where innovation versus representativity is. That's a question that this might be a useful way to conclude on this question. Is 6 enough, or do you need 7 or 5? You know, and I was listening and imagining 5 questions to help with structuring this on a block of 4 that are about the purpose of education, education itself, so the why, what is the motivation behind that education initiative, who are the people aiming at being educated, and who is the source of the initiative? Is it local? Is it national? You know, there's a whole range of things you can see as situation. What kind of content? You know, don't forget the Taliban's are students. It's a program, but I'm sure that the program here was different, and in a perspective of changing society, preventing colonization, a number of things were taught, perhaps centrally, perhaps locally, perhaps at the level of community. I don't know, but that's an interesting question that would help in answering your question number 2. And the how. How was this mission of education carried? And somehow I think the mention of Professor Izura, reminds me that the how is not just the pedagogy or the books, it's also the building, the place, or the places. You know, imagine in today's educational program the importance of school visit to museum, school visit to theater. So it's not only sort of carrying the students in the place, the program is now deployed in space. And when was there innovation? I don't know, but that's a, and I would suggest the 5th question is the now. What is the physical condition? What is the use? You know, as mentioned, the continuity of use. Use is an intangible dimension, by the way, but it's an added value. You know, when you have, I take an example from my world, when you have a church and you enter in the church and the light is still on over the altar, you have a sense that the spirit is still inhabiting the place. But there is some use, even if it's silent. If the church is just a building, then it's a pile of rock with beautiful carving. I think these are elements that also connect to the notion of integrity, the notion of selection, and but ultimately, I'm sure in Japan there must be the knowledge tool, and I'll quote something that came out when I was listening to our former Governor General in Canada, David Johnston. The Governor General is the representative of the sovereign. In Canada, he's the head of the army, and he signs the law instead of the Queen, and now King of Canada, because it's not the Queen of England. When she comes in, she changes her flag. But he was addressing scholars and students, and he was talking, and somehow he was warning them about confusing data with information, with knowledge, and with wisdom. And those 4 words are part of our discussion here. In the intent of the sites that are being proposed, as well as the intent of the nomination. And I think it's, by the way, David Johnston was the former chancellor of McGill University. So he was from the educational heritage himself. So I think with simple keywords, you can position different elements and check the series. I think the series before us, I only know one site. I find it fascinating that the site we visited was still, yeah, somehow there was still some school or learning activity going on. It's not just an artifact. I found it fascinating. I still have to understand better the site, but I think it's wonderful. But I'm curious about the other, but I would suggest that these elements are used.
はい、ありがとうございます。静谷学校の見学を踏まえて大変希望のあるお言葉もいただきました。ただ我々これから研究していかないといけない。
So we have to go to different sites and keep like researching about our educational heritage sites in Japan, and think how to how the schools have been influencing the community back then, and what is the heritage that we are left with now. So, Professor Mel, maybe like after hearing everyone's like opinions about it, do you have your own like maybe recommendation? Yeah, I gave a big keynote speech, so I don't really know what to focus on, but like what is the standard is basically a good question, right? So representative is one thing. For example, what type of school it is, like is it a private school, is it like an academy, is it like a public domain school or juku? And the timing is also very important. And if you think about it, a private school, like Kangien is like how important was Kangien during the Edo period as a representative of such school? Private schools are like have a unique specification, which is a diversity, and like they were basically accepting students from different social backgrounds, and that's quite an interesting point. It might be like for me, like Shijuku private school would be the most interesting point in Japanese educational heritage. I'm not sure if it becomes a representative, but I have this token of appreciation, I guess, like towards such type of school because of its diversity and that unique specification. So it's like just one teacher would be like teaching many students, and I'm not sure like if it's like was like a more of a like official classroom or more like a personal touch. But the issue would be like how, like I'm not sure if it's existing now. The components are existing now, but in those schools, like families were actually living in the school, so it was like a lodging school. So that is quite interesting. And same as maybe with Zoshin, if I'm not mistaken. So like in that picture I showed in my slide that of commemoration thing, it's a very like long time ago I went there, but I think I remember it correctly. But so like they took it is an example, but in case of Shijuku, is there like a very good representative which would be like very clear for everyone to understand? So we spoke about those 6 components, and unfortunately we are running out of time. So as a coordinator, I would like to finalize today's panel discussion. So what I wanted to know is like now the way that we are discussing this, like is it credible? So as Professor Bumbar said at the end, it's important to basically make it clear what kind of context that each school held in itself, including like historical context and social at the time, because they were all different. And how they were preserved is also an important point to keep in our discussion. So basically, we need to research more about the context of educational sites. One way, like, so right now, like we think that it's unique, like the way that this, like that we discussed today, but in Kangien is also, can we actually say that this is like the perfect representative of Shijuku? our personal opinion, maybe it does, but like we need to make it more clear to everyone else that this is a clear representative of that. But there might be like some parts which are not like clear. So we need to like establish of each shijuku what kind of thing it was, what kind of school it was back then in its historical context, and different type of schools. Like I think that it's the same. So we basically need to focus on how accepting those schools were. For example, like that the notion that women don't need to be educated and all, like, and if you're poor, you cannot access education. So, and if you like, even during in samurai like caste, there were people who might not like to be studying, right? Although they had all the opportunities. So of course, like at the period, early modern Japan didn't have like a perfect society, and they were like. I don't think that we can think of this perfect education, because the society itself was not perfect. But it would be interesting to like to what extent it could be perfect uh, and to what extent it provided education to those in need. And even if it's not perfect at the moment, as Professor Mel said, that we always need to like think of a future and keep it in mind that things that tend to look like they're impossible at the moment can become real in the future. So from now on, we know that this discussion will continue, and we will keep in touch with Mr. Bumbar and Professor Mel, and we're very happy that we had our keynote speakers today and our like experts from different fields, and all of you who are attending the symposium in the venue or online. So it's very like simplified conclusion, but we are very grateful for your opinions today, and thank you so much for participating in our symposium. Dear professors, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to once again give a big round of applause to our panelists. So, dear professors, please return to your seats. Thank you so much for your valuable opinions. So here we would like to hear some comments from Chihei Suzuki, a cultural property investigator in the Cultural Heritage International Cooperation Office, Cultural Resources Utilization Division, Agency of Cultural Affairs. Mr. Suzuki, please take the stage. Dear professors, thank you so much for your valuable opinions. So I guess there's a, just look at the comment. So I am like I'm working as a cultural property investigator in the Cultural Heritage International Cooperation Office, and how our early modern educational sites in Japan can become inscribed in the World Heritage Sites. So this is like my field of work. So another thing is that there are 190 countries participating in UNESCO masterpieces list. So how are we going to be part of that, and how are we going to inscribe our sites to that is like something that we need to solve from now on. Especially if you think about like we want to register our educational heritage sites, and we need to think how to explain the importance of those sites to the world is quite different, right? I mean, quite difficult. So it's like what was important about early modern Japanese educational heritage sites, and what was important to it from the viewpoint of humankind. So let's say that we achieved that. Let's say that we are in the list now. So maybe there's not just Japanese, but like different nations as well. If they become the UNESCO masterpiece, so what is the merit about that? So that we should think about it as well. For example, the latest such inscriptions would be in 2 years ago in Hokkaido northern part, like became inscribed in the UNESCO list. And it's not just like, wow, we got prescribed as UNESCO masterpiece, but like because of people now know about it as a UNESCO masterpiece, what kind of influence it's gonna have in the region itself, about the region itself, about like, for example, you can come here, you can enjoy this type of food, you can engage with type of businesses. So like getting to know all of that is very important, and because it has like influence on the modern region as well. So like we heard that there's like a 1,900 sites on the tentative list, but it's not like we have that many sites to be in that tentative list. There's like maybe 50 or 60 sites only. So from humankind, like if you look about it, we have no idea how people were living back then. It's like we study it one by one, but what we were eating, what we were like thinking about. So then says like about the era of Jomon would be very important to research more. So not just like for Japanese people living in Japan and not knowing much about Jomon era, it would be very interesting for international tourists as well to come and learn about that. So that's how, like today's keynote speeches and today's panel discussion and all the debates that we had today, it shouldn't be just OUV or ONV, but so because of we need to think of educational heritage site from all kinds of points. So how those people were, like we need to think about it from the standpoint of a humankind and from UN kind. So like in 2020, like report, I would like to get some comments from, and I have 3 comments actually about the report of the council. So first of all is about the value. So like we discussed in the panel session, like early modern educational system was super cool. And we should maybe introduce it to the world not through just tangible things, but through intangible things like the education system and all. So like it would for like a translation, interpretation of how it used to be. So it's also important to look at the standpoint of technology. Like, for example, it's not like some kind of a there are things like who think that to be prescribed as UNESCO masterpiece, there's just some team comes and just like evaluates and says, okay, this is UNESCO masterpiece now. But it's not that easy. So the whole process is much more difficult. So even writing that this site has this type of value is like a third point. But like, so what kind of site it was? So explaining that tangible thing, explaining the history that it holds, explaining the whole context is very important. So like in the report, we have a very detailed description of the building itself. So like you could see it in the pamphlet today as well. But like there is this value and there is this site which is still like present and preserved. And how do we connect those two things? How do we explain what's the value behind it? So it's not just about the tangible things. It's about the, for example, spaces and places which they are at. So it was another thing, right? Like the landscape behind it, the cultural significance to that, and for example, like there are different things. Like this building is preserved as it was in its original state. This building was restored and all. So because of that, it will be easier to value those things even if they're restored or reconstructed, looking at it from a point of a place, not a building. So another point is that, so like in the world, heritage is that so World Heritage List is protecting not just the buildings but the buffer zone around it as well. So they see it as like environment more than just a building. So in those 6 sites that we have, 4 cities. So like for example, in case of Shizutani Gakko, it's like it's talking more about the college town itself, not just the specific building of the school. And there are people who are like living there and who are facing some issues and working there. So just like that, that would be not just tangible building, but intangible environment around it that we need to think about how to preserve from now on. And it's not like we need to preserve it in its like very stale state. It has to keep changing together with the city. It needs to keep developing while keeping its cultural significance and historical significance. Sorry, I think I keep talking too long today, but the third point that I would like to think that didn't really become a point of discussion today, but it's connection to community. So those World Heritage sites, like we only think about how they are connected to the world history, but instead we should maybe think about how it's connected to the local community. Of course, like it's like in many cases, like the local communities are participating in preserving those educational heritage sites, but in some others we don't. So as a result, like maybe if this site becomes like an educational heritage site, like what happens to the local community? Are we gonna be happy about that, or would we care? So in that process of like inscribing the site to the educational like heritage site, we need to consider the local community opinion as well and their role. So what they can do as a local citizens and maybe like as specialists in their own fields as well. So we have to preserve it, those sites, but we also have to keep in mind the people who live there currently. So I believe in those things. Sorry, it was just a comment today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Suzuki-san. We are running out of time. Last, we'd like to ask Hayakawa, who is Education Heritage World Heritage Registration Promotion Council Vice President.
I am Hayakawa, the mayor of Ashikaga, and I'm very happy that you all participated today. So as we close this symposium, I would like to offer a few words of comments. So in something that educational site, which is the educational heritage site, which is like a big pride of my own town as well, and about its international value, and all of that we discussed today. So I'm very grateful to all the professors and the speakers today which joined the panel discussion, and also like I felt a lot of connection to the speech that Mr. Suzuki gave at the end. So us four cities are going to keep collaborating and working on inscription of our early modern educational sites, and to think on what kind of value they hold in the eyes of the modern world. So I hope that we keep in touch and that we keep receiving your comments and opinions and valuable advice. So I hope that you continue your efforts together with us. And I'm looking forward to working with you on this topic from now on as well. And it was a very interesting symposium. Thank you so much. So dear attendees, how did you like the symposium? I think we were able to hear some valuable discussions about the evaluation and challenges of the educational heritage of early modern Japan. The Council will continue to promote efforts with the aim of inscription of the educational heritage of early modern Japan as a World Heritage Site, and to help preserve irreplaceable cultural properties for future generations. Please note that we will use your questionnaires as a reference for future endeavors, so please fill it out and place it in the collection box provided at the exit. We really value your opinion, so please make sure that you fill it out. Additionally, the simultaneous interpretation receivers will be collected there as well, so please be careful not to take them home accidentally. With this, I would like to conclude the International Symposium, The Educational Heritage of Early Modern Japan Seen from Overseas. Thank you all for today.